Hello there, it's Al Murray here. You're listening to a We Have Ways of Making You Talk podcast, special edition. I'm sat in the car now in the rain, just coming down off an all, like a high, basically, because I've just been to the RAF Battle of Britain Memorial Flight Visitor Centre here at RAF Coningsby, and this is a podcast and a half. Hello and welcome to a We Have Ways of Making You Talk special. I am here at the RAF Coningsby. You can tell I'm excited at the RAF Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, and we're just in the sort of waiting-y bit in the hangar, and it's a hangar that smells of aviation fuel and 1940s aircraft. And I'm joined by I'm not joined, I'm being shown around by the boss, by the OC, Squadron Leader Mark Discombe. Thank you so much for having us. The 12-year-old me is exploding right now. I can see bits of Spitfire as I glimpse through.
I know, I'm excited as you are.
And you work here.
I know, but every time I'm here, it would be very easy for me to sit behind a desk and not do anything. But yeah. I force myself, and that sounds terrible, to come into the hangar. Because this is this sort of amazing sort of cathedral of old aircraft. And as you can see, the glimpse around here, it is an incredible place to be. So to have a peek and have a look, even for myself, I've been here now for 5.5 years. Yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, let's stop talking about it.
Come on.
Let's go around the corner. Right. Oh, my God.
So,
oh, my God.
As it comes, it doesn't get much better than this as far as I'm concerned. It's the best hangar in the Royal Air Force. I don't think anyone would disagree with me. Right.
So, I'm just going to describe it for the listeners. To my right, I'm 30 feet from a Dakota. Next to that, and the thing is, these aircrafts... it's winter, isn't it? So these aircraft are all being repaired.
They're in a state of undress, so you can see under their skirts at the moment. Yeah, but so that's interesting.
A Dakota, a Hurricane. That's a Spitfire with its D-Day stripes on it. Is that that's a photo reconnaissance aircraft?
That's a Mark 19, so a Griffin engine. So a big whopper in that one.
Great big lump, and then that's a Mark 9, isn't it?
Mark 5 closest.
Mark 5, sorry.
Then you've got the 9 in desert colours.
Wow.
And then as you come back around the corner, you've got a silver Mark 19, but with no engine currently. Yeah. And then something a little bit different, Spitfire-wise, the 16 with a low back and clip wings.
With a Packard belt.
With a Packard. In fact, for us, we've got two. We've got two with the American engine. We've got the Mark 9 and the Mark 16.
Right.
And the most important, because she's hidden around the corner, but she is just gobsmacking, is the Mark 2 Spitfire, the 2A that took part in the Battle of Britain.
Yes, that's just. You can see I can see the.
Oh, she is.
The brown and green colour scheme from 1940. Yeah. Okay.
So do you want to start?
Well. What's the history of the squadron? How did the squadron come about?
Okay, so this was the great idea of Wing Commander Thompson. He was at Biggin Hill. Yep. He had, and I wish these days would continue, he had a hack. So he had a Hurricane there that he used for his own personal getting around, which I really think the RAF should bring back. Yeah. Although some say I've got them here. So he had this aircraft, and they were using that aircraft and some other aircraft still in service to do commemorative flypasts, Battle of Britain, etc.
When was this, in the 60s?
So, no, this is in the 50s.
In the 50s, right.
And then he said, well, we're losing the opportunity here. We are putting these aircraft out to pasture and disposing of them. We're going to lose opportunity. So he formed the historic aircraft flight at Biggin Hill in 1957, which was the founder eventually to become the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. And it started with 4 aircraft, 3 Mark 19s, Spitfires that came from Woodvale, RAF Woodvale. Yep. And also one of the Hurricanes. 3 of those aircraft are still flying with the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight today.
Right. Wow.
So luckily, it's just one individual who really sat there and went, hang on.
We need to do this. Yeah. Because Spitfires were being sold and scrapped and dumped in the Irish Sea and all those sort of, just...
Well, the Mark II Spitfire was up for scrap and was actually sold for scrap for £25 after the war. Oh, so we were very lucky that the chap who bought it went, I think this is quite an important aircraft.
Hang on to that. Yeah. That is extraordinary. Where would this is your environment. Where would you start if you were showing me around?
So I think if we start and go through historically through we can do it either historically through the aircraft or how you, as a modern fighter pilot in the Royal Air Force, if you were lucky to be selected here, would go through your training. Start with the Chipmunk, the Hurricanes, and then work through the Spitfires.
Let's do that. So there's a Chipmunk over there. Now I remember those. I remember those. They're de Havilland aircraft, aren't they? So they've got
That's
that
right.
distinctive tail
Yes.
that's on the Mosquito
absolutely.
and on the Tiger Moth even.
Yeah, where the tailplane sticks out a little bit further than the rudder at the back.
And I remember when I'm old enough to remember cadets at my school who were in the RAF bit. I think once in a blue moon, they go up in these things.
If I had a beer for every time that I was showing somebody around and said, my first ever flight in an aircraft when I was an air cadet was a chipmunk, and it's me. I put my hand up as well.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I did. It's an incredibly good post-war trainer. The RAF was still using them up to the beginning of the 1990s. Right. For us here at the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, it was a perfect choice. So while we were disposing of some, we managed to keep 2 aircraft with the low hours on them. And the reason behind them is everything is to do with stopping in a tailwheel aircraft, stopping the back end, overtaking the front end. So the way I describe it, when you're flying the aircraft, they fly like any other aircraft.
Yeah.
On the ground, if you think about it, you've got these big wheels at the front, you've got a tiny wheel at the back. And the tiny wheel at the back is like your errant shopping trolley from a supermarket.
Yes.
It's just casters around and wiggles.
Does its thing.
Yeah, and it does vibrate. You get a very sort of the annoying one that vibrates away. But this is like throwing a dart backwards when you're on the ground.
Yes.
So the back end wants to overtake the front end. So we spend a lot of time, or I spend a lot of time, teaching the new fighter pilots the old techniques of using your feet, using the rudder pedals.
So
to
because
keep it in
there's,
line.
famously the Spitfire had a torque issue, didn't it? And you'd taxi sort of sideways. That's the story, isn't it? And there's footage of people taxiing sideways, and then they take off and they're kind of flying sideways. So they've got to see over the nose as well, haven't they? So you've the twin issues of the nose and then the torque.
It is.
Is that right?
I suppose there's 2 issues here. On the ground, you can't see where you're going generally.
Right.
So we weave along the taxiway.
Right.
And that is so you can look one side. I'm not going to crash anything. And then before you run out of taxiway, you quickly turn it the other way. So I always like to tell people, we're not rubbish at doing this. We're doing it on purpose.
Right.
And the second thing, yes, when you get to the bigger aircraft, there's actually a number of things that will want the aircraft to go sideways that you've got to fight.
Yeah.
Whether it's the slipstream, whether it's gyroscopic effects, but there's about 5 things.
By the way, in the background, I think that's a Typhoon.
It is,
This is also a Typhoon station.
It is. So it's a fully. Well, we've got 4 other units here, all flying the Typhoon, 2 of which are fully operational.
Going looking for bears.
And they will do whatever is needed to for the safety, which makes Coningsby quite an exciting place to visit. You see today, and coming in here,
so
you see yesterday.
So these fighter planes are kind of living next to their old context, if you want.
Absolutely. And I would say things like the Spitfire and Hurricane, their job was exactly what the Typhoon is today. They were cutting edge of their time.
Well, this is the thing James and I talk about a lot in the podcast. Is that the thing to remember about, for instance, we're right next to the Lancaster.
I know,
come
it's
down
quite
to the Chipmunks, but
off-putting.
I'm within spitting distance of a Lancaster here. The Lancaster is a stealth bomber. It's as cutting edge. It's literally a stealth bomber. It's designed
at the time. Maximum effect.
Yeah.
So it was all about even then effects-based operations. The effect we wanted was to take a large amount of bombs, but it didn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
So next year's 75th anniversary of Op Manor, where we took a lot of supplies to those people starving in the Low Countries and the Netherlands and Belgium.
But the point is, the tech in this, the H2S is absolutely cutting edge.
Yes.
The bomb sight is totally cutting edge.
Yep.
The navigational aids, everything, and G and all those things that are in this plane, or were in this plane, were as cutting edge as the F-35 is now.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the thing you've always just because it's got propellers on doesn't mean it's magnificent men in their flying machines. It's not some sort of old-fashioned novelty. It's
some of these aircraft as well, because of that, because they were the absolute cutting edge of their time. They don't come with a lot of the modern sort of aids to pilots.
No.
So I would say I've got 2 Typhoon pilots that fly the Spitfire and Hurricane here, and they would say that the aircraft now, the modern aircraft, are relatively easy to fly, very hard to operate.
Right.
Where I would say the Spitfire is relatively easy to operate in our context today. I've got to go to air shows and navigate around in benign environment, but incredibly hard to fly. This is look out the window, hands on stick and
the
throttle.
Spitfire's renowned for being the pilots at the time. They say it was a joy to fly. It was the sweet mistress of the air and all that. You get all that, don't you?
And people would say you don't get into a Spitfire, you strap it on. You feel part of it, and you do. But they are a handful on the ground.
How often do you fly a Spitfire then yourself?
Not enough, but on the
Well,
whole...
it's more than me.
Well, true. I'm going to get somewhere between 60 and 70 hours a year. So that used to be a lot. Now that we've got more and more interest in the civilian world, and certainly two-seat flying, that's not much. We've got certainly some civilian counterparts flying 500 hours a year.
So I've done 15 minutes at the back of the Twin Sweeter.
And it's awesome.
It was amazing. It was a completely mind-blowing experience. Which one do you fly, by the way, Mark?
I fly. I'm an
Generally.
instructor on the Chipmunks during the winter,
Yeah.
and then during the year, I'm in a very fortunate position. Being the boss, I kind of get to pick a little bit which one I want, depending which one's serviceable and how we rest them during the season.
Right.
But I'm qualified to fly on all of them, and I also convert people to them. So as an instructor, it's quite an easy job because I get to get them to read a book. I test them on the book. I give them a few do's and don'ts, and then tell them not to break it.
Right, so what we were doing was so you train people in the Chipmunk.
Yeah, doing that little bit of knowing what it's like to fly with a tail.
Piston aircraft and with a tail.
Yeah, so you can't really see where you go, and I get them to sit in the back seat, so they get to see my back of my
really
head.
Can't see where they're going.
And I get them to use their feet on the rudder pedals. From there, I'm going to take them across the Hurricane.
Right,
now the Hurricane, so right at the end.
Right at the other end. Well, let's wander up. This is great. Right, so we are at the Hurricane.
So
amazing.
The first thing we do is get in the Hurricane. Now, you could say that's an odd thing to do because there are less Hurricanes in the world. There's only about 14 of them flying, so a very rare girl. Flying-wise, she's a lot more old-fashioned. So the systems are old-fashioned. She's hard work to fly. I would say physically hard work on the controls. They're quite heavy. This radiator's been taken off, but the radiator is normally about sort of 6 inches below your bottom. So at that point, when there's the radiator's 100 degrees, you're probably
it's a very hot in the
hot environment. So as a Spitfire pilot, when the new boys fly a Hurricane, you have a good laugh. You land and you're quite cool and collected, and they're coming out, literally like being in a sauna. So airborne, she's much harder to fly than a Spitfire.
Because essentially it's a Hawk Fury but with a monoplane.
Absolutely.
Because
I think they went for the easy option.
Yes,
Get rid of the top wing.
Yeah.
Make the gear go up and down.
Yeah, and put the great big brand new Merlin engine that Rolls-Royce have just developed and got dead right.
Yeah.
And there you are, and you've got a
perfect.
modern monoplane aircraft.
300 mile an hour, 8-gun fighter.
Yeah.
But because they did that, they weren't really going to the cutting edge that we saw later in the Spitfire. But I get this first because a lot of the problems we've got are less pronounced on the ground and the landing. So you've got a better position, sitting position. You get to see the runway more when you come into land. The undercarriage is further apart than a Spitfire.
Yes, it's a famously much more stable undercarriage design.
And it was Geoffrey Wellham, before he passed away, when I was talking to him, was pretty much saying that, the youngest Battle of Britain pilot. And he described, and it's a perfect description of the Hurricane as a workhorse, Spitfire as a thoroughbred.
Yeah.
So if you consider that analogy, you've got this, lumbering, great big Shire horse.
Yeah.
Plods along, really docile. Takes a little while to get up to speed, though.
Yeah.
And you look at the thoroughbred, when she's in full flight, just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Being led around the paddock on the floor, holy
Yeah.
shmoly, you've got to hang on to it.
Yeah.
And so it's the exact way to make the description of it.
Now this Hurricane here, the wheels are off. It's up on the
trestles now, and the jacks.
And there's two guys working on her now. And of course, famously, it's fabric. So if the fabric covered with fabric, if the fabric goes, what do you do? How do you replace the fabric?
Well, it's relatively easy, and it would have been the same in war. That if you've not hit anything, which is if somebody makes a slip, or a bullet goes through it, if you've not hit anything vital, it is just cut another bit of fabric, stick it on with some red.
Where do you get your fabric?
So currently, although there are modern materials,
unless this is a military secret.
No, not at all. Our aircraft are still covered with Irish linen, which was the traditional material, but there is a new material that we're slowly moving to.
Right.
But our aircraft has still got Irish linen.
Amazing.
And then they've got red dope on them, and that just kind of stretches up. It's like a varnish almost.
Yeah.
And that stretches it up, and then we paint over the side. So gun ports, they've got red.
Yeah.
That is just the colour of the natural colour of the dope. That isn't red paint. That's just the dope being used to cover up the ports. Yeah.
I didn't know that. Gosh.
So a very hard aircraft to get right in the air. I think she's hard work to fly. Very, sort of hot in the cockpit. But landing, she's got her quirks, but she'll soak them up.
Right.
Unlike a Spitfire, where she'll bite.
Yeah, if you make a mistake.
If you don't get it quite right on touchdown, she's more likely to bite and make you regret it.
And what's the provenance of this Hurricane then? Is this the last one ever made?
No, this is LF363. This is a Hurricane we are fairly sure is the last one to enter RAF service.
Right.
So towards the back end of the war, hasn't got much of a pedigree. The other Hurricane we've got, which isn't here now, she's away with a civilian contractor going through depth maintenance. She is the last one that was ever produced.
Right, wow.
With a great history of flying with Peter Townsend, doing air racing, and eventually gifted at short notice to the Royal Air Force by their chief test pilot before anyone could change their mind. And then obviously possession 9/10 law, we wouldn't give her back.
So how many Hurricanes have you got?
So we've got two.
You've got
about 14 in the world.
Right.
So I think that in itself is an amazing aspect. Brilliant Merlin engine up front, and that really is the heart of pretty much most of the aircraft in the hangar.
Basically all the aircraft except the Dakota, is it? Well, and you've got a couple of Griffins.
And a couple of Griffins where they just wound it up.
Now, how many hours do you get out of a Merlin engine? And then when you've got all those hours out of a Merlin engine, what happens next? Where do you get a new one from? How many Merlin engines are there out there on the Merlin engine black market?
Now you can do most of the things. So there's some really good companies around the world, and in Great Britain itself. We contract to a company in Britain that looks after the engines. They will do full overhauls for us.
Right.
A lot of the dressing of the aircraft, generators, that you can get refurbished.
Right.
Some elements are new, so you can get newly machined components. The main part of it, sort of crankshafts and the main block, you can't get, but they're quite bulletproof. They're pretty heavy duty items. We've got enough here to keep us going. We've got spares. When we walk back down to see the Lancaster, you'll see we've got a few underneath green tarpaulin. So we're looking after ourselves here. So the engine, I would say, is the more critical item. When you look at the fuselage, I mean, it's bent metal to the right shape and riveted with a lot of passion and I guess skill behind it, because it is a craftsmanship.
And the other thing you're not
element.
doing with these aircraft, after all, is flying them in combat. You're not pulling loads of G. You're not climbing them at maximum rate, and all the things that happen to fighter planes.
All the things I'd love to do.
Well, obviously.
But the biggest goal here is longevity. The whole point here is for my sons and daughters to be able to see these aircraft, to carry on the commemoration, to inspire future generations, and also I think when we go to air shows, it is there to celebrate the current Royal Air Force. By looking backwards.
Yeah, because like you said earlier, the role is identical.
Yes.
The fighter role the interceptor role is identical. That simply hasn't changed. And then the ground attack role that these aircraft then developed into as the war went, especially the Hurricane, that hasn't changed either.
The Hurry bomber.
You flew Jaguars, which is essentially a fighter ground attack aircraft.
Absolutely, and doing a very similar role, because some of the time I did in the Jaguar, it was before a lot of the modern weapons were really mainstream. So it was a very similar role. The whole point of these aircraft is maximum performance and firepower. Their one goal was to stop the enemy.
So once you've done your hours on the Hurricane, then you move on to the Spitfire.
Yeah, so I go Chipmunk into the Hurricane. They want to have at least 10 hours, normally around 20, 25 hours. And then I'm going to get them into a Spitfire. Now I've got 3 different classes of Spitfire. So we look at the baby Spitfires, the Mark 2 and 5. Really lightweight. Then you go on to the 9 and the 16. And we class those as one type. And then we go on to the beasts, the Griffin-powered Mark 19s. Now I start with the 9 and 16 because they've all got the same wing. And the 9 and 16 has just got a little bit of extra weight to it, so it'll want to sit on the runway a bit better when you land it. The 2 and the 5,
it's not as skittish.
Exactly, the 2 and 5 are really skittish. Everything that you desire in a Spitfire. You touch down, and you just tell she wants to keep flying. You've got to just be, really gentle. Let her settle. Let her slow down before you think too far ahead of getting back to the hangar. And then the Mark 19s are just, well, they're beasts with a Griffin engine.
Because the remarkable thing about the Spitfires, because you've got your Mark. Am I right in thinking the Mark II? The essential difference of the Mark II is it doesn't have the twin pitch wooden propeller. It's got a multi-speed propeller. That's the big development, wasn't it?
They did, and with the Mark I, you ended up not having a fully feathering propeller, as you say.
That's
it was
right.
Generally two-bladed, and also the gear you end up having to pump up and down.
Yes, you had to pump the gear by hand, because you see that footage of them. Early footage where they're all wobbling about because they're pumping the gear by hand.
One arm doing one thing. It's
more typhoons, ladies and gentlemen. But the remarkable thing is, by the end of the war, they've doubled the horsepower essentially and doubled the payload, and the same airframe. And this is sort of the genius of the design and the genius of the project management at Vickers, really, because they swallow up Supermarine. They get this plane and they go, right, this project has got proper longevity in it. The airframe is designed that we can amp this aircraft up and get it basically subsonic.
Yeah, well, they started hitting transonic speeds. When you're looking at some of the reports you were getting from pilots in the later model Griffin-powered Spitfires in dives, they were starting to experience some of the control issues that are going transonic as you're approaching the sound barrier.
Fly in the opposite direction and all that sort of stuff.
Very odd to do with aerodynamic twisting of the tailplane.
Yeah.
So, because they weren't designed to take on those forces.
Yeah.
So, it just shows that although there's only 1 year between the first flight of a Hurricane 35 and the first flight of a Spitfire, it was that next step, generational sort of move of aircraft design, going in from, as you said, a Hawker Fury in essence, which they kind of modernised slightly into a clean sheet design using, from their air racing
monocoque construction, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, although the wing is a different, it's very different to their air racing wing and all that sort of stuff.
Absolutely.
I mean, however, the Hurricane. The famous thing is that there were more Hurricanes in the Battle of Britain. They accounted
2/3 of the fighter force.
Yeah, and accounted for more. More kills.
So you could say it's I would suggest you go, well, they had the same kill rate as the Spitfire. There's the counter argument. Some people say that the Hurricane was used on some of the slower bombers.
Used on the bomber streams. But that's just using the right tool for the right job.
Absolutely.
There's no kind of. Looking for the competition in it, I always think is kind of
I think she is the unsung hero. I think when you look at her, she's not as pretty as a Spitfire. She doesn't get the accolade because, it's a PR war as well at that time. The Spitfire was the latest thing. There were even stories of German pilots who were shot down. When they were told they were shot down by a Hurricane, would be like, no, it was a Spitfire. Because there was more honour in being shot down by a Spitfire.
So that's your Mark 16, isn't it?
So the Mark 16, which is a little bit different.
Which has got the pointy tail, which was because of the extra horsepower, wasn't it?
Yeah, so you'll find that from the Mark kind of 9 onwards.
And the clip wings, so it perform better at lower altitude.
Well, also roll rate.
Right.
So it is good at low altitude because you've got a little bit more lift on the wing, which stabilises it, makes it bounce around a bit less. But also it's a much better roll rate. So if you consider an ice skater, and when they're spinning, as they bring their arms in, they spin faster.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening here. You're removing the mass from the outside, bringing the centre of mass towards centre, so she'll spin, and it's noticeably quicker. So the first time, and I've got the station commander who's got this joy to come, the first time you fly the 16, as you roll it, you think, whoa, that is considerably quicker. And that's just, I always like to say hacksaw 2 foot off the end of the wings. So it makes a huge difference.
And the teardrop canopy.
The teardrop.
The thing is, our listeners will know this, is that the previous Marks of Spitfire, the canopy is in line with the fuselages that runs all the way back to the tail.
That's right.
And in this, the fuselage is lower, and you've got a bubble canopy around you, so you can essentially see out and all around you.
It's brilliant. So it's called a low back because of that. Exactly as you say, the back of the fuselage is lower, and it's the only aircraft I've flown with a bubble canopy, and it's brilliant. It's quite amazing to see behind you. It doesn't, and the other reason you've got a good visibility behind you, they haven't stuck a rear view mirror on it. Where if you look around at the other ones, where it's not quite as easy to see, you've got a rear mirror
signal
on most
manoeuvre.
Absolutely.
Right, well, brilliant. Now, the thing is, though, we've talked a lot about, we inevitably talked about the fighter planes, because there's so many fighter planes here, but we're right next to this Dakota.
It's barely noticeable.
DC-3, C-47, the air transport workhorse of the Second World War, and we've talked on the podcast, we've talked an awful lot about airborne operations, Arnhem in particular. This famously, Flight Lieutenant Lord flew one of these. This is the if you've seen a bridge too far, it's the plane they're all jumping out of. And I've jumped out of one of these, which
mad.
Not something I care to repeat.
Absolutely mad.
What's striking about this? I've always thought is what's so striking about the Dakota is you look at Spitfires and people talk about form and function and the aesthetic form and function meeting and all that sort of thing. And that's the thing people say about Spitfires a lot. I think it's the same with this plane. These are beautiful, and it gets called a transit van, but it's not. It's better than that, isn't it?
It is. It's far better. So sitting next to it, I think it's one of those things where a job done well by Douglas. This was the next generation of transport aircraft.
Yeah.
It's the first one with a truly round fuselage, which meant it bigger. you could all of a sudden have a fuselage where in the perfect sales pitch for this aircraft is you could drive a Willys Jeep straight into it. Just get a couple of planks on the back and it goes. It's the first time that you've got engines with a capability where if you fail, you can carry on. If one fails, you can carry on.
Yeah.
Before this, if one engine failed, pretty much old aircraft, the second engine would take you to the scene of the crash.
Yes.
This is something that will carry on and keep going. So it's just an incredible. I think Eisenhower said, so he said there were 4 things in the war that, items that really helped bring the war to an end quicker and to help the Allied cause. And this was one of them. So he didn't mention any fighter aircraft. When it came to aircraft, this is the one aircraft he mentioned, the Dakota, for getting in troops and people and getting back our injured.
James would love that. That's the operational aspect of war that he keeps talking about. He bangs on and on about on this podcast, and he'll be delighted to hear that. I mean, the interesting thing about this, of course, is that early on, this plane was obviously available to the Allies, and so the British put in loads of orders for it because we knew we couldn't make anything like this.
No, this was, and I think it's nice to know this. There's times where you want to be homegrown. There's times where you want to use your best, and we've got the best in Britain. It is and was great. But there's got to be times where you realise, and especially during war, that no, we need something, and that's as good as it gets now. So let's get it on the table and let's get it into
what
theatre.
Engines are these? So it's a radial, isn't it? So
it is. So a twin Wasp. So you've got actually 2 banks of radial. So you can see the front bank here, but actually behind that there's another bank. So there's 14 cylinders in total. Pratt & Whitney made. Yep. Air cooled. So the only the Chipmunk has got an air-cooled engine, but if we look at operational type engines,
the others are all glycol-cooled, aren't they?
So 70% water, 30% glycol, nice vivid green colour. For us, it's training aircraft. Which is quite hard to believe because we use this to train our crews before they move on to the Lancaster, which is much more of a handful. And I'll hand over to one of the bomber pilots in a moment, and then he can give you a flavour of what it's like to fly these aircraft. But also, it's got an incredible history in itself in the war. So this aircraft painted to represent one of the first that landed in the liberated France. So we got it in D-Day invasion stripes now. This year, during the display season, there was an opportunity for us in the 75th anniversary of D-Day to a drop of parachutists. So we ended up dropping 16 Air Assault Brigade into a drop zone near Caen.
Wow.
So, to be able to take part in that in such a vivid reminder of what we're doing with, real paras.
But not at night in bad weather like they did on the occasion.
No. But I think it was fair to say that 16 Air Assault Brigade, the flight attendant I was talking to there to organise it, said he could have retired early if he could sell the tickets. There was a lot of hierarchy of very
I can imagine.
It's just a one-off.
It's a beautiful plane. But thanks. This is full. Willy Wonka is basically the. It's like talking to Willy Wonka.
It's awesome.
Well, we've talked to the boss. Now let's talk to someone who actually works here. Neil, you fly. What do you fly? You fly the Lancaster, right?
I'm very privileged to fly both, actually, Dakota and Lancaster, yes.
Goodness me. I mean, did you ever imagine, when you first got into flying, did you think, I'll end up flying the Lanc at the RFP?
No, not at all. It was always one of those jobs that someone else did.
Yeah.
And it was always, when you join the service and you're just privileged to be in an Air Force aircraft and you're happy to get your wings and do your first squadron, again, it was always something that was years and years away and for the privileged few. And then it sort of just happened, I wouldn't say by accident, but the ducks aligned and here I am.
Yeah. Now, the Dakota is used for training, is that right?
Yeah, we originally got it in the early 90s as a training aircraft.
Yeah.
It's quite robust, as it was back in the day. I think it was Eisenhower that said you can crash it or shoot it, but you'll never wear it out. And he's right with that. It's a very tough airplane. We do certainly use it at the start of the season as a training airplane.
What, to get people used to flying twin prop?
Tail draggers, that's the key.
Right.
The fact that it's a tail dragger configuration.
Yeah.
It's sometimes, or in most cases, it's the pilot's first ever experience of a tail dragger airplane.
Right.
And they do handle differently. On the ground and landing, they're a different beast to conventional airplanes.
So you fly, you're not a fighter pilot, right?
No, we tend to stick with the aircraft class that we fly or have flown previously in our careers. So the bomber boys, as we call them, that fly here now, we're part-time to BBMF.
Right.
We have main jobs flying heavy aircraft around the Air Force, so I fly the Sentry out of RAF Waddington.
Right, the AWACS plane.
Yes.
Right, okay. To those that don't know, that's the plane with the great big mushroom on the back.
That's right.
For reading car number plates at great distances.
Sort of.
Apparently.
Yes.
Right. And so you're then put in one of these, and how many hours do you do on this?
The way it works is you'll start off your first season flying the tail dragger in the Dakota, which was originally procured as a training aircraft.
Yeah.
About 2.5 hours as per the syllabus.
Yeah.
You'll do all the upper air handling, stalling, single engine flying, touch and goes. Then you'll be cut loose to go off and fly the aircraft on your own for the first time.
And how is it to fly?
When you first get in it, you think, oh, it's an old American airplane, there's loads of room. There isn't. It's quite a cramped cockpit. It's an awkward aircraft to taxi. It's an awkward aircraft to take off and land. But like all airplanes, like riding a bike, the penny drops and suddenly you're quite comfortable.
Right.
It does set you up nicely for when you move on to the Lancaster. As a training aircraft, it's ideal.
Well, should we move on to the Lancaster? Should we do that? Basically impossible to take in here.
I know what you mean. It's. I remember the day I got the phone call saying, mate, you're on the team. And it's just a permanent grin.
Yeah.
And people get sick of you telling them you're on the team.
Yeah, I can imagine. Tell us about this Lancaster then. What's the story with the actual aircraft? What's its provenance?
It was built like a lot of the aircraft in here. That some were built and took part in the war. Notably P7, who I'm sure the boss has told you about. Some didn't take part. Some were built towards the end and didn't see a lot of action. The Lancaster is one of those examples. It was built in 1945.
Yep.
It was destined to go out to Japan as part of the Tiger Force.
Yeah, Tiger Force, yep.
The Americans dropped their bombs, the war ended, and luckily she never saw any action, which is why she's in such good condition of an airplane.
So it hasn't got 100 hours on it. It didn't have the hundreds of hours that because the Lanc famously was built to do about 100 hours, wasn't it? And then people and then it's
odd to think of, but largely throwaway items.
Yeah.
7,737, and there's 2 left.
Good God. And basically a huge percentage of British manufacturing output put into making Lancasters and nothing else.
That's right.
Because the American bomber types weren't good enough.
Nope.
And this was
carpet bombing.
The absolute
Room 101
for carpet bombing.
That's right,
which after all is what this is for. It's for area bombing or dehousing or whatever euphemism you want to use.
Yes.
It's for killing civilian populations
en masse.
Unfortunately. Yeah. So, and that must. I mean, is that a thing that occurs to you, or do you think
it is?
Yeah.
It is. It's. If you read Johnny Johnson's book, he has a start of his book. He talks about a lot of public opinion about what they did during the war.
Yeah.
And he's quite firm in his belief. You weren't there. You didn't have to live through this and the fear of what might happen if we didn't.
Yeah.
And that's quite true.
Yeah, because the public opinion was actually pretty fluid about area bombing, quite interestingly. Anyway, so here we have 4 Merlin engines. One of them's got the propeller off at the moment. So what's happening in the terms of maintenance now? Is this just checking everything?
Yeah, deep
top
into the
to bottom.
That's right, deep into the winter maintenance program. As you can see, it's on jacks. The wheels are off. They're inspecting and replacing or repairing any and everything, making sure that it's in tip-top condition for when we start our public display workup for next season.
Right. And how many hours did you fly on this last year?
I got about 50 hours in this last year. Wow. I've got just under 200 on it altogether, which is quite a lot considering the amount of hours we're allowed to fly each season.
Yeah. And so now, if I'm right in thinking that crew on this there'd have been a bomb aimer, the guy in the front turret, the navigator, radio operator,
flight engineer,
rear gunner, and then the pilot and a flight engineer, no co-pilot. Because after all, this is a Manchester that's been amped up.
That's right.
So Avro built the Manchester, which had 2 Merlins on, and they were underpowered famously,
hugely.
Couldn't lift the load, couldn't do the speed, because of course the thing about the Lanc is it's a 300 mile an hour aircraft if you're going for it.
That's right.
So it's quick. It's as quick as the Hurricane was when the Hurricane came along. So do you still fly with just pilot and flight engineer, or do you have a co-pilot? How does it work?
We have a co-pilot now because obviously it's being used in a completely different role to what it was during the war. But we have to get the captain ready for displaying. And for displaying, I mean doing the individual display, but also thinking the bigger picture of flying with 2 fighters on the wing.
Yeah.
So the standard Lancaster Hurricane Spit display.
Yeah, that we've all seen.
There's a lot to consider in that. So if I was to talk you through a new pilot, he'd join the team, he'd start on the Dakota. 2.5 hours later, he's off flying that on his own. He'll then do his display workup. He'll get his first public display approval. If all goes well, mid-season of his first season, we'll then start his co-pilot conversion on the Lancaster.
Yeah.
It's not a lot, actually. It's about 45 minutes of training.
Yep.
Because you are a non-handling pilot, you don't land the airplane from the right-hand seat.
Yeah.
So you really are doing the flight engineer's job, but from the right-hand seat. But if you think about it, you're exposed to the full display package. So then later on, when you've got some more time on the airplane, you're ready to jump in the left-hand seat and take command.
Yeah. I mean, when you start this up and those engines go, and it must be the most extraordinary.
It's mixed emotions. It's you come into work, you do the Met brief, you plan the sortie, you talk to the fighters about where you're going to meet them and how you're going to arrive on your display venue, and then it's a case of fear. You're the only one the RAF owns that's airworthy.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Excitement. It's a different aircraft to handle than conventional airplanes.
Yep.
That's why the Dakota is such a good training vehicle. It's a tail dragger, so it will bite you on landing. It's also difficult to taxi, and there's a little voice in your ear saying, "You've got to land it, mate. Don't get this wrong."
Yeah, you can't stuff that up.
No, you can't, and you don't want to be the RAF pilot that wrecked our priceless Lancaster.
I hadn't thought of it like that. I thought you were going to say it's an honour and a privilege, and I can't quite believe it.
All that.
The opportunity.
It's all that, but it's you want to bring it home safely every day without any damage, and also if you think about it, you're in today's modern age of Facebook and Twitter. You're in a very public forum when you're on display.
Yes, because you do see a lot of that pushback. They didn't turn up on time and all that sort of thing. I think it was the weather.
That's right.
The weather of these aircraft are precious.
It is, and you've got ultimate sort of cloud-based limits to operate to.
Yeah.
We don't have any icing or instrument flying capability.
Right.
But also the big gotcha, particularly if you're a new pilot, is the crosswind limit. So we haven't got big grass strips. We have a concrete runway to land on wherever we are, and we can't take more than 10 knots across if you're a brand new pilot, or 15 if you're an old hand. So again, they're not big limits.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that's one of the reasons why we tend to not turn up.
Right. So what's difficult about flying? You say it's a difficult aircraft to handle. What's difficult about the Lancaster?
Taxiing is difficult. It doesn't have a pin like the Dakota that keeps the tail wheel straight. So keeping it straight is a combination of rudder inputs, outboard engine inputs, jabbing the brake to keep it straight. The penny drops on that.
So you're working all the time?
All the time.
Right.
Yeah. But on landing in particular, without getting too technical about it, most of the mass is behind the main wheels. So if you don't land straight, that mass wants to swap ends and turn the aircraft around through 180 and straighten itself out. Whereas conventional airplanes have the mass in front of the wheels and they will help you straighten up on the runway. That makes sense?
Yes. Yes, it very much does.
Yeah.
It very much does.
So
make sense.
we call that a ground loop, and the airplanes will bite. They will bite.
And it's determined to do that when you're landing it?
It's not determined if you're straight, but it's determined if you're not straight. That's the point. Yeah.
Bloody hell.
And no amount of rudder or braking will stop it from doing it if you let it go.
Right. Has that happened to you?
No. Hence I'm still on the team and they call me the bomber lead. It's we can all make mistakes, but we wrap them in cotton wool and we train hard so that doesn't bite us.
Yeah. I can only imagine you got to, haven't you? A quick little bit extra. Neil's just brought us round to the back of the Lancaster, and there's a plaque here on the fuselage. What we got here, Neil?
Well, if you're ever lucky enough to watch us as we're starting up and taxiing off, just before the crew get into the aircraft, we always enter via the rear right entrance. There's a little plaque on the side of the airplane, and it says to remember the many. So that's referring to the many of Bomber Command, the 50,000 plus that didn't come home.
Yeah.
And you'll see every time a crewmate goes in that exit, just give it a tap as a mark of respect before he gets in the airplane. And we do that without fail.
Incredible. Now I noticed there's no tailplane.
There's not a lot to this aircraft at the moment. The wingtips are off, the wheels are off.
That's it, crated up there. Is that the tailplane crated up there?
Yes.
So what's the story there?
We're putting a new one on is the bottom line, and it's
Right.
all part of keeping the aircraft going forever. So there is an element of triggers broomed to all these aircraft, and various parts are getting replaced.
Right. And that's being sent off to some specialist fabricator. And
It is. It's off to get measured, isn't it, Norm? Off to get measured so we can build a jig to build another one and eventually replace the tail that's on.
So we've just popped round to the back of the Lanc, and here is the rear gunner's turret. And the thing I've stood by aircraft like this before in the past and looked at this, just the loneliness of it, and It's hard to put into words, and you're at the end. You're freezing cold. You're miles from everyone else in the aircraft.
Yeah. Back in the day, if you ever meet any rear gunners, they were the first airborne and last to land.
Yeah.
And I did my first, what we call a famille flight in the Lancaster, actually from the upper turret. So as you can imagine, we're like kids in a sweet shop when we're learning to fly the thing. So they put you in the upper turret just to watch and listen and take it in. So that wow factor's taken from you for when you then start to learn to fly it properly. I can remember being in the upper turret on my way down south with the guys, and you feel very, very exposed. Very exposed up there.
Yeah. Big
glass bubble, all on your own. I wouldn't want to do it during the war.
No, I mean these jobs are sort of unfathomable, really, and again at night.
Yep.
This the thing with these aircraft is they're designed for night flying, and so you're at the end here looking. I don't know what you're looking for. You're looking for someone's exhaust trail. You're looking for the rest of the bomber stream. You're
a bit of luck.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's all. I mean, and of course there's an open panel because so you can definitely see clearly through the perspex. So how cold it is there, and you've got a heated suit that you plug in, and you hope that works.
Yeah. The other thing about all those suits is if you ever get the chance to walk inside the Lancaster, you think it's a big airplane. You think it's a big machine. It's not. It's very cramped with lots of little steps in it and things to get caught on. So I wouldn't have wanted to have been anybody in the war with their heated suits on, with their sheepskin leathers, on fire in a spin at night, trying to jump out.
Well, with your parachute and getting over the main spar is the crew at the front of the aircraft have to get over the main spar to get to the exit. I mean, none of it's good, is it?
No, and it will be panic. It will be sheer panic.
The questions of area bombing aside, what these people are going through and the fear and the guts required.
Yes. Very special people.
Yeah.
2 ways about it.
This is just the most. I mean, you know, I'm amazed I'm allowed in here, but you get to fly the.
I know, and it's. I think it's been described already. It's the best hangar in the Air Force. Everyone wants to be here. Everyone's happy to be here, and no one's ever upset when they come to BBMF.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time, Neil.
My pleasure.
Absolutely fascinating, and I mean, it's Willy Wonka in here, isn't it? It's the thing. That's the vibe I'm getting anyway.
Good. Yeah, it's good. Well, it's nice to meet you.
Likewise. Thanks very much.